Welcome everyone. Today's tutorial is going to be focused on learning by experience. In particular, talking about experiential learning in BYUIdaho's learning model for students of college success here at BYUIdaho. Several years ago, there was a researcher named David Kolbs, and he proposed a cyclic learning cycle where people have an experience, and through that experience, they try to do something. And in the trying, they make a reflective observation. Did I do this thing correctly? Did I not do this thing correctly? If the answer is no, Kolbs suggests that we then create a hypothesis in our mind or some sort of strategy whereby we'll be able to do that thing correctly. And then those who are trying to learn, they will actively test that hypothesis or strategy to see if it works. If it does work, then Kolbs says you have learned in this cycle. If it doesn't work, then Kolbs proposes that we go back and formulate new hypotheses or strategies, test those out, make reflective observations, did those work or did those not work, until we have actually tested a strategy that works for us, and then he said that we've learned. Now, a researcher named Zoll, who's a neurologist, discovered that there's actually physiological evidence for Kolbs' theoretical cyclic learning construct. So he found that when we experience an observation, when we experience a concrete experience, where in our brain the sensory and post-sensory part of our brain starts to fire, starts to be activated. And then as we make reflective observations, did we do this right, did we not do this right, that activates the temporal integrative cortex region of the brain. As we think about hypotheses and strategies, our frontal integrative cortex is activated in the brain. And then finally, as we test those hypotheses, the premotor and motor part of our brains, the part responsible for taking action, is then activated. So it's really fascinating that there's both physiological as well as theoretical evidence for how we might learn in this cycle. Now, there are a couple of problems with Zoll and Kolbs' model. Not that they're bad or per se, it's just that they're more incomplete. For example, concrete experience is a pretty abstract term. So concrete experience could be a challenge that we have in our life, a problem that we're trying to solve, some sort of experience that we're trying to, undergo, a behavior we're trying to learn. For example, learning another language. Part of learning a language that's really important is correct pronunciation. Now, if we try to pronounce words like a native speaker and realize that in our trying we're not doing it in the way that a native speaker would, then we're making an observation. There's a gap here between the way I'm saying it and the way I would like to be able to say it, which is like a native speaker. Now, there are some times, though, that we might not notice from our own observations if we're doing it right or wrong. That's why it's important to receive feedback. So that's kind of something that Zoll and Kolbs are missing, is how important it is to receive feedback from other people, people who are objective and can help us to do the things that we're trying to do. Now, another thing that's really, really important, in addition to hypothesis formation and testing, is intentional practice. Suppose that we try the strategy, if I listen to, watch media in this language that I'm trying to learn, and if I try to position my mouth and my tongue in the exact same way that native speakers do, if that's our strategy and we test that and it works, then that's great. But that's not enough. We actually have to practice and practice and practice. This is what Duckworth calls deliberate or intentional practice. So there's the adage that practice makes perfect, but it's not quite as true as practice makes permanent. So if we want it to be more perfect, we have to practice in perfect ways. Another problem with the Zoll and Kolbs model is that it doesn't account for motivation. Things like grit and growth mindset. If we're not motivated to do something, we're not going to do it, right? If we have challenging math problems, if we have, a 10-page English paper to write, these are challenges we have. If we have Spanish verbs to memorize, but we're not motivated to do those things, we're probably not going to do those. Now, I think if we consider motivation and practice into the model, then I think we have a more complete model. Now, what's interesting here at BYUIdaho is I think there is some spiritual evidence to support the theoretical model of Kolb as well as the physiological model of Zoll, and that's the BYU-Idaho learning model. And the way this maps is very interesting. The prepare stage of the learning model really maps well with Kolb's concrete experience, or the challenge and problems or the behavior we're trying to learn, which then maps to the sensory and post-sensory part of our brain. Now, when we prepare, again, as we mentioned before, motivation is so important. Having growth mindset, having grit. According to the BYU-Idaho learning model, having faith in Christ's grace, okay? Taking responsibility as a learner. These are really imperative launching points for us to be able to learn. Now, the next part, teach one another, really relates well to observation as well as feedback. If we're giving each other feedback, we're helping to both teach one another but also learn from one another. Another part of the learning model that still relates, it's kind of in two realms here, is pondering. As we're thinking about our behavior and if that was what we wanted to do or not what we didn't want to do, we ponder those things. And that's an important part of the BYU-Idaho learning model, as well as Kolb's cyclic learning model as well. Now, finally, proving is just as imperative in BYU-Idaho's learning model as it is within Kolb and Zoll's model. Okay, as we prove, that means we are thinking in the pondering stage. We're thinking about strategies. We're making observations, but then we need to actually prove this. And this is where prove and taking action, those parts of the BYU-Idaho learning model, they come together. It's not enough that we just understand things in class. We then need to go and do. And it's through the doing and through the intentional practice and taking action over and over again that the things that we're learning start to inform our behavior. And as our behavior changes, then we become something new entirely. So this is a mantra we have at BYU-Idaho: to know, do, and become. If we want to be transformed through our educational experience, we have to take responsibility, we have to learn, we have to prepare, but then we need to ponder, we need to prove through the actions that we take so that our behavior is changed. Now, what does this mean in practical terms? What this really means is that we're trying to, in College Success, trying to teach you to put on your scientist hat on a daily basis. Think about what's working in your life right now. And then think about things that are still challenges for you, things that you need to overcome to be ultimately successful in life and ultimately successful here at BYU-Idaho. What we can do with the learning model and with Kolb cyclic learning and the way that our brain works is we can make observations about things that we'd like to change. For example, if we're having a struggle managing our time, it's not enough just to know that we do that. It's in order to make changes in our life, we have to actually do something about that. So, according to this model, we would make observations. Are we managing our time well or not? If the answer is no, then we go through the stages. If, for whatever reason, we aren't able to fully appreciate whether or not we're managing our time well, it's important to, if people give us feedback, to take that feedback and then think, what strategies can I use in my life that will help me manage my time? Again, this is an example. We could keep a planner. We could put notifications in our phone to remind us about appointments and things like that. We could have, a time matrix table that we use every day to sort through our urgent and important things that we need to accomplish on a daily basis. If these are some strategies that you might employ, it's not enough to think about those things. It's then you have to test those, prove those by taking action. And as we take action and intentionally practice getting better at things that we struggle with or problems that we have, then that's where we improve. That's where we learn by experience and we perform the practice that helps us to progress in the ways that we would like to progress. So that's the takeaway from this, is for you on a daily basis, examine the challenges that you have in your life right now, the good and things that are problems or challenges, and then apply these. What strategies could you use to help you overcome that? What feedback or sources of feedback could you receive to help you? What sources on campus could help you with certain things? And then how can you intentionally practice those strategies in order to get better? Okay, everyone, thanks so much for listening. That's it. We look forward to see you in a class and being able to discuss this in further detail.